I'm Shannon Ireland, your host of a Healthy Push podcast. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. Everything used to be hard for me. Even just driving 5 minutes from my house used to feel impossible. But now I absolutely live for travel and adventure, and I experience lots of peace and joy. I've not only reclaimed my life, but I've helped hundreds of others to do the same. Here, we stop managing anxiety and instead we create a healthy relationship with it. One where you say goodbye to the anxious thoughts, symptoms, panic attacks, and fears, and you actually live your life. Forget complicated strategies, quick fixes, or the same old hacks you've heard 100 times before. Each week, I'll bring you simple, actionable advice and honest conversations that lead to real, long-term healing. You aren't just an anxious person, my friend. There are reasons why you're struggling with anxiety, and these are things you can fix and heal from. And this is where that journey begins. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. Hello, and welcome back to a Healthy Push podcast. I am really excited. I have another amazing guest with me, Dr. Noor Al-Humaidhi, and she specializes in menopause. And today's conversation, I know, is one so many of you have been needing. Over the course of, I would say, years, I've heard from so many women in this community saying things like, my anxiety is like through the roof. It suddenly feels worse, or my symptoms are changing and I don't know why. And I think maybe perimenopause is part of the picture, or I know it is, or maybe I'm menopausal. So I invited Dr. Noor on the podcast. She's a physician who specializes in all of this, and she brings both professional expertise and personal experience to this topic. And we're going to talk about all the things. We're also going to talk about hormone replacement therapy, what it is, who it can help, and a lot of the myths that have been out there that we've been taught to believe. But I know it's not just about hormone replacement therapy. So we're going to talk about more than that. So whether you're in your mid-30s, just starting to wonder about perimenopause, or you're in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, and you're like, I know that this is going to be helpful, I am really excited for you to feel more informed and supported and so much less alone. So Dr. Noor, welcome to Healthy Push podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this. So let's just start where we've got to start. So a lot of women who are in their mid-30s to mid-50s, really might be experiencing a lot of symptoms, feeling like something's off. Maybe this is perimenopause, maybe I'm menopausal. What are some of the most common and maybe even most surprising signs and symptoms that you see in relation to this?
So it's an interesting question because historically, and the way that a lot of people kind of pigeonhole menopause is historically, in my mind, I'm a physician. I've been taking care of patients for 20 years. It was like hot flashes and night sweats. That's what it was. And then, the more that you start to take care, I start to take care of women, but equally, the more that I started to have symptoms is I really have realized, and I've talked about this before, in my experience seeing clients and in myself, the first symptoms of perimenopause are mental health symptoms. They are anxiety, people tell me they feel flat, they're irritable, they're snappy, they don't know why they do not feel like themselves. And that is what long before there's a change in your period, long before you're going to see any physical symptoms of perimenopause, is this change in mental health. And it is overlooked for the majority of women and missed. And I think that really starts for a lot of women in their 30s.
I'm so glad that we started here because I know so many women right now are probably just like breathing this sigh of relief of, okay, like maybe I'm not crazy, right? Like maybe this mental health stuff that's going on isn't just anxiety, right? Like maybe there's more to it than that. And what you said of just not feeling like yourself, that's such a hard thing, right? To like go to a doctor or to start to have a conversation or to even know like where to start. Like I just don't feel myself. Like I feel anxious, I feel kind of irritable, a mess, and you're just like, "Oh, it must just be my period," right? So I'm curious, is the anxiety, the mental health stuff more around the time that you are like about to get your period, or can it sort of be any time through your cycle?
So if you think about the menstrual cycle, and we can go through the biology of the menstrual cycle if you wanted to, but just a 30,000-foot view of the menstrual cycle is, let's say you have a 28-day menstrual cycle. For the first half of the menstrual cycle, what we call the follicular phase is when you're making a lot of estrogen as you develop follicles, and follicles are tiny, tiny cysts with little eggs in the middle of them. So as you develop follicles, you're making a lot of estrogen. And then in the middle of the cycle, you ovulate. And after you ovulate, you start to make progesterone. And progesterone is predominantly made in the second half of the cycle. Most commonly, very early perimenopausal women will present with symptoms of low progesterone initially. And they'll tell me, before my period, I am going to burn my house down.
Yeah.
Before my period, I am snappy. You can't even live with me. I can't sleep and I'm so anxious. That's usually the very earliest sign that, okay, we are starting to see perimenopause because of this low progesterone that we're seeing in the second half of the cycle. And then, but it's fluid. That's fluid. Some months you do make progesterone and you feel better. And then some months you don't make that much progesterone. And then you sort of slip into making a little bit less estrogen. So that transition from low progesterone to low estrogen and your symptoms being across the entire menstrual cycle is very insidious. And, you don't realize you're there until you're there. And you're like, how long has this been going on? I don't know. I ask patients this question all the time. When's the last time you felt well? And they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
What is well? It's tough to kind of pinpoint, and I think that's why it's so hard to define. And in medicine, we love to measure things, Saying, "I don't feel like myself," is not measurable. It is not a measurable outcome, right? We love measurable outcomes. We love things like, you know, data, and in mental health, we love PHQ-9s and GAD-7s, and if you don't know what those are surveys that you take that measure how anxious you are, how depressed you are. We love things like that. But a lot of this is just not measurable. It's just you just have to go with your feeling, and we're not taught to do that. And I think this is where women excel though. Women are really good at feeling the energy in the room. And I know a woman comes in, she sits in front of me, and I can feel her energy. And I know in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, I can feel the difference in her energy. And in my opinion, that's measurable to me. But
Hmm.
somebody looking in that was looking at my notes and my data would say this is not a measurable outcome.
Yeah, it is so hard because it's like, too, I think a lot of women, just women in general, we have like that intuition and like something's not right. And I know personal experience, right? And maybe you can speak to this too. Like you're generally a healthy individual. Like you eat a good diet and you drink water and you move your body and you're really supportive of your nervous system and you're doing all this stuff and you're still feeling like you're not yourself. You're just feeling off, all the things that we talked about. And you're like, what the heck is wrong with me? And I think that's where we often end up like, what's wrong with me? So I think along these lines, there's so much confusion too surrounding what's quote normal in perimenopause. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit because I think it's really hard for someone to distinguish, especially if you're already struggling with an anxiety disorder, right? Like, is this anxiety or is this perimenopausal symptoms? So, what's normal?
Normal is fluid. I mean, you can't really say, there's a normal, because this is why it takes effort to treat perimenopause, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a moving target. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's always things that, and I have on staff a mindfulness meditation specialist who works with my patients, and she's a life coach and she works with my patients. I have a dietitian on staff that works with my patients. We partner with a one-on-one weightlifting gym. All of those things are important, and that's why I have them, right? All of those things are really important to make sure that we are the best that we can, what we can be. However, It's important that we don't gaslight women and say, oh, it's just because you're, not meditating enough, or, oh, you can't sleep because it's your phone in your room. I mean, granted, the phone in the room is a problem. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my phone in my room is a problem. It's a battle that I have every day, right? Of not putting my phone in my room. But that is to say that that's the reason I'm not sleeping is gaslighting. Yes, taking the phone out of my room would probably help me. I'm not saying that, but it's not going to stop me waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's really important that we don't tell women to eat better and exercise more and, I don't know, don't drink alcohol. All of those things are important, but they are not the answer. The problem is that you have changing hormones, and there are things we can offer you in addition to the mindfulness and meditation and the nutrition and the magnesium and the whatever
Mhm.
that can actually help you and make you feel better and help you sleep if that's the issue. But in answer to your question, there isn't, again, back to being measurable. There's no way of saying this is definitely perimenopause. This is definitely the way we make that diagnosis is by listening to the patient. What is she saying? When did this start? When are her symptoms? How do they manifest? And drawing the best conclusions that we can about what we think the symptoms are being caused by. But more importantly, sometimes, and I said this to a patient yesterday, sometimes you have to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. So sometimes you're like, I think it's perimenopause. Why don't we try something? We could always stop it. Let's do it for a month. If you feel better, then that's your answer. Sometimes the diagnosis is in the treatment.
Yeah. I love that you said that because this is one of those things where it's like, well, what is normal? Well, there kind of is no normal, and it does fluctuate, especially from woman to woman. I think another thing that I'm wondering, because we often hear a lot about perimenopause, but it's kind of not clear, right? Is there an age in which it starts, or is it like it can start at this age for some women, it can start at this age? Like is it kind of just all over the map?
So, in terms of perimenopause, if you think about the average age of menopause in the United States, so menopause being a year since your last period, that's the definition, which is terrible, and we can talk about that. But if we're going by that definition, the average age of menopause in women in the United States is 51 and a half. But menopause can start really on average between the ages of 45 and 55 is normal.
Mm.
So, if we're taking a woman going into menopause, meaning her last period at 44, and you subtract 10 to 12 years from that. So we're talking about perimenopause potentially starting in her early 30s. Additionally, something that I talk about and that annoys me is this idea that hormonal issues or, hormone problems that can manifest with poor sleep and anxiety are only owned by perimenopause and menopause. So I have women that come and see me and they have PCOS, PMDD, PMS, postpartum, and I'm treating them with bioidentical hormones because those people have hormonal issues that are causing their symptoms. And when I give them hormones, they feel better. So in answer to your question, in terms of perimenopause, you're talking about early 30s, potentially starting, but there are women that are younger that are presenting with hormonal symptoms that can benefit from treatment with appropriate hormones.
Gotcha. Okay. That's so helpful. I know understanding is one of the most helpful things. And I think having that knowledge and education is so powerful. So, can you explain, like, dumb it down? Because even I'm like, I don't think I quite know what is happening, like, hormonally during perimenopause, and why do these fluctuations increase anxiety and irritability and like just that general off feeling? Like, is it just the low progesterone, or is there more to it than that?
So, one of the problems with the misunderstandings around what perimenopause is the issue we have about the way that menopause is defined. So, menopause is defined as the point in time at which you are a year without a period. Now, this is a terrible definition. It makes it about periods. So, people are just like living and dying by whether or not they have periods. And really, periods are a symptom, right? Periods really are not a great actually indication of underlying hormones. And I've seen women with very low hormones that continue to cycle, right? So using periods as a way of diagnosing menopause is terrible and it's doing a disservice to women. So in order to understand perimenopause, we need to redefine menopause. So if we redefine menopause today as the point in time at which we run out of viable eggs, Okay, so males and females are fundamentally different in their gonads. Our gonads are our ovaries, they are our reproductive organs. Male gonads are their testes. In a male testicle, right at this moment, they have a form of stem cell called a germ cell. So they can make fresh new sperm every single day from now until the day they die, unless they're castrated. We don't have that ability. We made all of our eggs all at once when we were a 20-week-old fetus in our mother's uterus. We made our lifetime supply of eggs. So we don't have an infinite supply of eggs, right?
Yeah.
Menopause is when we run out of eggs completely. Perimenopause is when we've dipped below a critical threshold of egg reserve. So in a normal circumstance, in a normal menstrual cycle, if I go out and find a 22-year-old and stood her in front of us, in a normal menstrual cycle, for the first half of her cycle, what we call the follicular phase, which she is what we call recruiting eggs. So her body, her brain sends out hormones and it's like, let's make some eggs. And hundreds of eggs in that follicular phase start to develop in her ovary, all in sync. It's a beautiful wave of egg development. Those eggs, as they develop, is what makes the estrogen, right? So the eggs that are developing make the estrogen. So what we see in that follicular phase is a beautiful rise in her estradiol level. Then she comes to the middle of that cycle. And at this point, one of those hundreds of eggs has won the race and become the dominant follicle. It won, it's going to be ovulated. At this point, our brain sends out a different hormone to trigger the ovulation. So you have this big, giant follicular cyst that's waiting to be ovulated with the egg in the middle of it ready, and it ruptures and it sends that egg on its way. We're now left in our ovary with that leftover follicle, and we call that the corpus luteum. And this is why we call it the luteal phase. So the second half of the menstrual cycle is the luteal phase. And in that phase, that corpus luteum, its job is to make progesterone. And progesterone prepares our uterine, holds our uterine lining, waiting for a pregnancy. If you've ever known anybody that's had IVF, for example, or maybe recurrent miscarriage, so in IVF, after they do the embryo transfer, they give them high doses of progesterone. Why? Because we need to keep it all in there so she doesn't have a period, right? That's really expensive stuff. We can't lose it. So our body does exactly the same thing. That corpus luteum makes progesterone and we're holding that uterine lining and our brain is listening for any hormones suggesting that there is a pregnancy. And if after 6, 7 days, there's no hormone suggesting that our pregnancy, our brain hormones drop. They drop our estrogen and progesterone, and we shed the lining of the uterus, which is the period, and the whole thing starts again. That's a normal menstrual cycle. Beautiful rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone. In menopause, if we're not making eggs and ovulating eggs, then we're not making estrogen and progesterone. In perimenopause, we've dipped below a critical threshold. So now for the menstrual cycle, our brain says to the ovary, let's make some eggs. And our ovary says, I've got 10, right? I don't have that many, but I'm going to try. So it's making 10 eggs. And now there's significantly less estrogen around. As a result, our brain sort of panics and is really trying to ask the ovary to do something. Come on, ovary, we can do this. Let's find some more. And our ovary tries, and it will find a couple more eggs here and a couple more eggs there. And we end up in our ovary with a situation where we have eggs at various stages of development kind of layered on top of each other. Nothing is in sync. It's
Yeah.
very chaotic and messy. And as a result, what we see is estrogen levels sometimes that are super high and then they're super low and super high, huge fluctuation up and down of our estrogen level. And then you come to the middle of the cycle and your brain asks that ovary to ovulate, but there's nothing to ovulate. It's all a big mess. So nobody makes progesterone because we don't have a corpus luteum. So in perimenopause, it's characterized by these rise and falls of estrogen and very little progesterone production. Women often will present very early, like I said, with those progesterone symptoms, but very gradually they'll start to present with low estrogen symptoms because of those dives that they have in their estrogen level. People get this thing, they get oh, I'm estrogen dominant. They did my estrogen level at 700. But I've shown, and something that I talk about online is you can do an estrogen level in a perimenopausal female and it's 700, and then you do it a week later and it's like less than 15. And she's symptomatic at the less than 15 often, not at the 700.
Wow. Okay. That was so much, but so incredibly helpful. I don't think I've ever heard it explained that way. So, say someone comes into you we'll just say my age. This is not, I'm not going to use myself specifically, but like 38 years old. And they're like, okay, I've been experiencing quite a bit of anxiety. Like, I've definitely not been feeling myself. I have had some testing done, but my doctor has basically told me like everything looks normal and like maybe you are perimenopausal, but like who knows? If somebody comes to you at that point, what is sort of that course of action? I know obviously it's really individualized per person, but like where do you even start?
So on the topic of the labs, what's normal on labs for an estradiol level is very wide,
Yeah.
right? And so it's totally unreliable and not helpful at all, especially like we said, in a woman that's having these highs and lows of her hormones. You don't know where you're catching that, right? So it's to generalize one test and say that your hormones are normal is not appropriate. So where I would start is I would take a history. Tell me what's happening. How are you feeling? When is it happening? Do you have triggers? Do you have a cyclical nature to it? Are you sleeping? What are you eating? I know just tell me about your history. I want to know about your family history. When did your mother go through menopause? I want to hear it all, right? Bring everything. And if you've had a history of pregnancy, I want to hear all about that. I want to hear about your birth trauma, all of it. And then we lay that all out. Let's get the whole history. Tell me the whole story. And then we'll make a decision. Okay, well, this sounds to me like perimenopause. So we can initiate treatment. And that's something that's really important to me. People are like, do I have to wait until I get my labs done? No, we're going to start treatment because I have a brain and I can decide based on my clinical judgment whether or not this is appropriate for you. So what I do is if I think somebody's perimenopausal, depending on what I think, if it's just progesterone or it's progesterone and estrogen, I will start them on hormones. In the meantime, we'll do labs. We will put them in our scanner. They'll meet my dietitian. And what I'm looking for in the labs actually is not, we will do the hormone levels, but I kind of don't care what the hormone levels are. I just want to make sure nothing else is going on. What are your inflammatory markers? What is your blood sugar looks like? What is your insulin? What is your D? What's your B12? What's your ferritin? What's your kidney function? What's your liver function? We need to make sure that there isn't something else that's hiding that's potentially causing some of your symptoms. And I'll give you a perfect example. I saw a client, I want to say like 6 months ago. She actually has a background of breast cancer and she, estrogen positive breast cancer and is on medication for that and was sort of like came to see me with some kind of difficulties, sleep symptoms that she was having and, trying to decide. And she'd read all the things, whether or not she wanted to take hormone therapy. She was still on treatment technically for her, estrogen positive breast cancer. So there would be risk in doing that. Right. But I said, okay, well, hang on a minute. Let's just make sure it's nothing else. Guess what? Her B12 was like 2. We replaced her B12 and she feels great.
Wow.
So it's important you don't miss big other things that are causing the symptoms before we pigeonhole everything into perimenopause and menopause.
I love that. There's so much to look at, but it's so nice to hear you say, like, we don't need to wait. We can sort of see, are there things that are going to make you feel better while we look at everything and see what might be most helpful. Okay, let's talk about, because I know this is another really big topic and like we're trying to put a lot into this conversation, but let's talk about hormone replacement therapy because you talk a lot about the benefits of this. So for someone who's curious about it, let's start here because I think this will be helpful. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you wish more women understood about hormone replacement therapy?
I would say the first thing is that HRT is one thing. Hormone replacement therapy can be estradiol, progesterone, testosterone in various combinations, some of them alone. So I see people that are like, "Oh, I tried HRT and it didn't work for me." Yeah, no, that's not a thing. Like, what were you on? There's like 100 different ways that you could do HRT and different hormones you could try. So the first thing is this idea that it's a one size fits all. It's hard to do HRT well in kind of the conventional healthcare setting because there's a lot of back and forth and and communication and what's happening, and we change this and we change that and we up that and we pull that and then we stop this and start that instead. And that's just it's a process to find what's going to work properly for anybody. So the first one would be that hormone therapy is a one size fits all and everybody's on the same thing. And that hormone therapy means estradiol. Not necessarily. It could just mean testosterone, or it could just mean progesterone, or it could just mean It could mean many different things. So that would be the first thing that I would say, one of the big myths. The second big myth is that you have to wait till your periods stop to start hormone therapy. That is ridiculous. And that goes back to this statement about how stupid the definition of menopause is,
Yeah.
because it makes it all about periods. And it's something that really like irritates me about this like obsession with periods. It's like, no, it's not. It's not about your periods. It's about how you feel, actually. Your periods are kind of secondary, actually, to the conversation. Yeah, it's part of the conversation, but it's secondary to the conversation. So the myth is that you have to wait till your periods stop to take some form of hormone therapy. That's not true. The third one is that hormone therapy increases your breast cancer risk, and it does not. I could go on and on. The fourth one is that you can't take hormone therapy if you have a family history of breast cancer. That is a myth. If you have a history of a clotting disorder or a family history of a clotting disorder, that is a myth. If you have hypertension or hyperlipidemia, that is a myth. The majority of women, the vast majority, can safely take hormone therapy.
That's really good to know. I think the big ones that, I've heard, and especially like saying you can't start it until you're in menopause, like those are all really helpful things. So, is there someone who's generally a good candidate for HRT? And are there generally people who are not good candidates for this?
I would say in medicine, we use the term contraindicated, right, or contraindication. Like, what is an absolute contraindication to somebody starting some form of HRT? And I would say there are no absolute contraindications to a woman starting HRT. There is just a conversation to be had
Hmm.
for all women, right? So the big ones that need to be a big conversation needs to be had is a history of an estrogen positive cancer. That's a big conversation. That's not a no. I treat women with a history of breast cancer all the time, but it's a conversation that's very individual. It's very individual to what happened, what did she have? What type of cancer? What was the histology? When was it? What treatment did she have? Because we're trying to assess her risk of recurrence. Equally, the idea that if, one of the other absolute contraindications that people talk about is unexplained vaginal bleeding. So I don't call this an absolute contraindication. Yes, it needs to be addressed, and we need to figure out that anything else is going on, but that's not going to stop me from treating you if I think you're appropriate for treatment. So in my opinion, there are no absolute contraindications to hormone therapy. There are just individual conversations to be had with each patient.
That's really good to know. Okay. So, on the other side of things, is there somebody that you're like, okay, yeah, you're absolutely a good candidate for HRT?
Everybody's a good candidate for HRT.
I figured you were going to say that, but I wanted to hear you say it. So, I'm just curious if you're willing to share this. If you're not, that's totally okay. But is this something that you have personal experience with?
Mhm. Yeah, I can tell you about my own experience with perimenopause. So I'm now 40, I just turned 43. And when we moved here from the UK in 2017. And so we had made this big move across the pond with our kids and our dogs and really restarted our life, bought a house, restarted our careers. It was big. And during the process of restarting my career, I had to take a whole bunch of exams and get reboarded and do all of those things. And at that time, I started to have a lot of fatigue. And I eventually, actually, the day after I took my board exam, realized, standing in the mirror, looking in the mirror at myself, I realized I had a goiter. I was like, "Oh, I have a goiter." And I took a picture and sent it to one of my colleagues. I'm like, "Do you think this is a goiter?" She's like, "Yeah, that's definitely a goiter." So I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I was started on treatment. But I didn't really feel better. I mean, I definitely have hypothyroidism because I had a giant goiter and my labs were crazy, but I didn't really feel that much better from a fatigue perspective. But then it was right around the time of COVID. So when COVID happened, they closed our off. I still was working for a big organization then. They closed our office and we opened what they called a respiratory clinic, or a COVID clinic. And so the 17th of March, 2020, I opened this clinic. I was one of the two doctors that opened this clinic. And obviously it was really scary and we didn't know what this meant and we didn't have PPE. I mean, PPE wasn't even like a word that anybody knew, right? We
Yeah.
didn't have masks and it was like a nightmare. So at that time, I started to have a lot of anxiety. And I just was thinking, okay, this is just because of what's happening, right? I'm just really, really anxious. I mean, of course I'm anxious. My kids are at home. They're very little with my husband who was working 16-hour days on the computer. Our kids were basically like feral in our house because I had to work all the it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I started to get very, very anxious and I stopped sleeping. And when I say I stopped sleeping, I would go to bed. I would be so tired and I would go to bed. I could fall asleep at like 7. But then like I got a couple of hours sleep in the early, and then I would wake up. And I was waking up thinking that the house was burning down. I was waking up thinking that there was a noise outside. There was somebody trying to break in. I had these like really intrusive thoughts that something was like we're all going to die here every single night. And I would get up and I would be in the basement with like a flashlight and I would be outside of the house with a flashlight, like convinced that there was somebody trying to break into the house. It was awful. I thought that I was anxious. I also was having a lot of brain fog. And, as somebody that has taken a million exams and aced everything her entire life and had like I mean, I used to have the memory where I could tell you, oh, yeah, that happened on, the 17th of August, 2002, and you were wearing, your blue dress. That's how, like, I've had that kind of memory gone. I couldn't remember what happened yesterday. I was turning up at the wrong place. I was forgetting dates. I was just forgetting to pay our mortgage. I was my brain stopped working. And so I thought, okay, something neurological is going on. So I went to see neurology, thinking, oh my God, okay, I have MS. That's what it is. I have MS. I have Lyme, whatever. They did all the testing. I don't have MS. I don't have Lyme. They were like, you need to see psychiatry. Went to psychiatry. They put me on drugs. They did. They were trying to help
Yeah.
me. They put me on SSRIs and they tried to give me sleeping pills and just nothing helped me. And then I was scrolling Instagram, in the middle of the night, as you do. Something just like was like, oh, wait a minute. It was can't even remember what I saw or who it was. And it just like this thing clicked in my brain and it said, this is hormones. This is perimenopause. And as soon as I like made that connection in my brain, it all like became very clear. And I was then able, people weren't really prepared to prescribe for me initially, but I was able to advocate for myself and I did get prescribed hormones and the change was overnight.
It's just so crazy, right? Because I think when we experience this stuff, we attribute it to so many other things, right? Just like stress, the pandemic, being a mom, and like having to just deal with all the mental load. And I'm so glad you shared this because I think it's so relatable that like you literally just think this is just because of all the stress and overwhelm. And you don't really land in this place. And especially for you, having all of this knowledge, right? And going through all this education and still going through kind of all these steps to then realize, oh my gosh, this is hormonal. So when you started hormone replacement therapy, was it like pretty quickly that you saw a drastic change?
So my sleep and the anxiety was within weeks. I was sleeping through the night and I was less anxious.
Wow.
Other symptoms were a little bit slower. Like my fatigue was slower to improve, but it did improve. My mood it improved initially very quickly and irritability, but I still feel even with the passage of time that it's even now getting better. Like the other day, I'll give you an example. Me and my daughter put up the Christmas tree and she was putting the decorations on the Christmas tree. And I have this like box of decorations of things that I like crafty things that I had made with my friends one year. It's like this fun memory that we have. And she dropped one of them and it shattered. And she looked at me and I was like, that's okay, don't worry. And I just, swept it up and that was it. And we carried on. But Noor of like 3, 4 years ago would have like lost her mind
Yeah.
inappropriately.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking in that moment after, I swept it up, it was gone. And I just reflected, and I thought I would have totally like yelled at her. I would have snapped. I would have been like not the person I want to be.
I mean, hormonal stuff, right? We know like it affects us so intensely. And sometimes it's so hard to recognize or and even give ourselves that grace of like, it's hormonal stuff and it's okay. And there are solutions, right?
And there's like collateral damage. I just want to jump in, like the collateral damage of your kids, of not getting this addressed, and the collateral damage to your kids. And I was telling somebody the story as a joke the other day. But one of the really ways that I got super, super anxious was was skiing. So I used to ski with the kids, but that one year and my daughter was like 5 or 6, and we had gone up to we have a little mountain, Gunstock, a little mountain here, and we were on and she was on the not the bunny slope, but like the this green, blue, I don't even know anymore. But we were on the chairlift and she was little, and I had a panic attack on the chairlift, and she was 5 years old. I'm like, "Mommy, it's okay. I'm here with you. I'm gonna help." I can cry about it now. "I'm gonna help you get off. It's okay." I mean, my 5-year-old had to, like, talk me off a ledge. It's awful, and I like, when I reflect on that, I'm like, "Ugh," to put her through that, and she must have been terrified.
I don't know. I always think so instinctually with little kids, like they don't have that same fear that we do, right? That they just like that response kicks in. Yeah. And they just want to be helpful.
Totally. Yeah, they have a survival thing that they do. Definitely, I agree.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you shared that because I think it's so much of what I hear, right, in my community is like there's so much anxiety, panic attacks, and like it's not even really like because of something. Like I'm not even really doing anything. Like I can't, there's no real trigger. And so I'm so glad that you shared that. So okay, back with the HRT. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable because that is so insanely helpful. But what does the process typically look like? Like a brief overview of someone starting HRT, because I think it can be really scary, I think, for a lot of women to even think about going there, but then actually starting the process is like a whole nother thing.
So again, it depends on the symptoms of whether I start her on progesterone only. If I think that actually she's really, really early perimenopause, she's probably making enough estradiol. At most, her symptoms don't sound like estradiol; they sound like more progesterone. I'll start her on progesterone alone. So, and that is a capsule that you would take at bedtime. And we'll see how that goes. And then if her symptoms actually I'm like, "No, I'm suspicious that some of her symptoms are also estradiol symptoms." Additionally, I will start her on a low dose estradiol. So that usually is transdermal, so I'll use like a patch of gel or a spray. So generally, if somebody comes and sees me and I think they're perimenopausal, I will either send them away with a prescription for progesterone only to take at bedtime initially, or I will do the progesterone plus the estradiol while we kind of like tinker with everything else and figure things out. It's so interesting because there's this thing about hormones and this connotation with the word hormones that people have like that, they're like hackles go up nearly that they would take hormones, but like they're out there buying like TikTok shop supplements that they swallow or supplements from Amazon that they're prepared to ingest into their body,
Yeah.
and you just think like the amount of like cognitive dissonance that's involved in that you're willing to put that or your CBD gummies or that you're buying from, I mean, just all of it. Like you think that is a lesser, concern? I disagree. I think that's a greater concern.
And none of that stuff is regulated, right? I think about this all the time. Like supplements, you have no idea oftentimes what you're buying, where the ingredients are sourced from.
And so much of them now, there's so much counterfeit. Like,
Yeah.
Thorne we carry Thorne in our office because Thorne was one of the first supplement companies to get Therapeutic Goods Administration clearance, which is the Australian FDA, which is the hardest FDA to get through. And that's why I have Thorne in my office. But I know that there's Thorne like online that's counterfeit. It's not even Thorne. So people think that they're buying Thorne and they're not.
I'm so glad you said that because it is, I think there is such a maybe like even stigma, right, around using hormones, but we're so willing, right, to try so many other things and we really don't even know what we're putting into our bodies at times.
Totally.
But it just goes to show, right, that you want relief, you want to feel better. And so you're literally like trying anything and everything. But of course, that's where it's helpful if you are feeling like maybe it is perimenopause, maybe there's something else going on to like advocate for yourself and have an appointment with somebody who can actually help you, right? So, okay, HRT, I'm so glad that you talk about this because I know it's been so insanely helpful for so many women, but it's not just about hormones, right? Like there is other things that you can do to support yourself. What are some other things that you really firmly believe are incredibly helpful when you're struggling with hormonal fluctuations?
So I think one of the things that happens when we start to lose our hormones is our ability to cope and be resilient is lost. So we can cope with really, as women, we can cope with pretty terrible situations and live with pretty terrible situations or, terrible mental health problems or, terrible history of abuse or whatever it is, right? And somehow get through it. But losing our hormones, that ability, whatever, castle and house of cards we built to cope disappears. It crumbles. One of the things I tell people is, we have to deal with your trauma. We have to deal with everything that you're holding, your baggage. We have to look at your baggage. And that's why I have somebody on staff and we work closely with a lot of therapists in our area because we need to deal with our baggage if we want to be the best people that we can be when we're 70 and 80, right? And you're never going to fully feel better until we deal with that baggage. And that's something that I'm learning as well.
Hmm.
Like I resisted therapy for years and I finally been like, okay, it's time. We're gonna do this because I'm grown up and I know that I need to do this to be the best mother that I can be, the best person that I want to be. So I would say being honest with yourself about what makes you happy, what makes you tick, and really leaning into that is important and is part of this whole conversation. And that's why I have Jill on staff. This and the other non-negotiable is really exercise. We need to exercise for our mental health, but also for our bodies. I have spent my entire career caring for older adults. And let me tell you something. Older women, yeah, people always love to comment on my Instagram. Oh, my mom lived to 90 and she's a whippersnapper and jumping around. Yeah, she's an outlier. The majority of women are not living till they're 90. And if they do, it's horrible. The majority of women are struggling with chronic disease from their late 60s onwards. And those are all life limiting conditions. So exercise, move your body, keep your bones strong, keep your muscles intact, grow your muscles if you can. And then exercise for the community and for your mental health.
Yeah.
So exercise is the second one. The third one is food. Like you can't come to me crying about I can't sleep and then you're eating like stuff out of packets all day. Like the two things can't exist together. We really need to address food, especially because we really are what we eat. And we talk a lot about the microbiome in our office. And just quickly to tell you, the microbiome is the kind of universe of other organisms that live symbiotically with us in our body. So we have bugs and fungi and bacteria that live in our skin and they live in our mouth and our eyelashes and in our vagina and in our gut. And they're really important for our function. We've evolved to live in a symbiotic relationship with them. And in our gut, they serve many important purposes. They form a mucus layer barrier between what's in our gut and then the kind of blood and tissues that are outside of our gut. And we need to feed that to make sure that we maintain that barrier so that we can ingest anything that we want without triggering a response. And we know that, I mean, there are amazing mouse models where they have taken a mouse model and given it a genetic knockout to trigger obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms, so OCD symptoms, and then taken the microbiome feces from a mouse without this problem, injected it into the rectum of the mouse that has this problem, and their OCD symptoms resolve. There is a huge connection between what's happening in our microbiome and our brain that we're still figuring out. But to take that a step, everything you put into your body is going to affect your microbiome. So everything you put into your body can have an effect on your brain. And people need to understand that connection and that your brain is what you eat.
I'm so glad that you said those few things because they're massive. I mean, the emotional stuff, so, so big. And we often want to overlook that stuff, right? As well as the exercise and the diet. And your body and your brain is so intimately connected. And I think so many of us lose sight of that and the importance of that. So I'm so glad that, like, your practice is so well rounded, right? It's all of it, not just looking at one thing and not just saying, like, oh, HRT is going to solve all your problems. Be on your way.
Yeah. I tell people, it's not hormones by Dr. Noor, right? That's not what we do. And if you're looking for just hormones, I'm not your girl. Like, go somewhere
Yeah,
else.
I love that.
we're going to challenge you, and we want you to rise to this challenge in every aspect of your life. If you're just looking for, a patch, go online. I'm not your
Yeah,
person.
that's so amazing. Okay. I wish I could spend so much more time with you. But this conversation has been so helpful. And I know that so many of the listeners are going to be like, okay, where can I find this woman? So if people want to find you, connect with you, learn more from you, where can they find you, Dr. Noor?
So my practice is Lifestyles by Noor. I'm in Exeter, New Hampshire. I do a lot of telehealth as well. I'm also licensed in Maine and working on a couple of other states as we speak. I'm also online. My handle on Instagram is Ask Dr. Noor, same on TikTok. I am in the process of setting up a sort of another website that's more kind of around my personal brand. I'm hoping to develop a newsletter and maybe some courses and products kind of geared that can really help women in this phase of life. Maybe that can't access me from a practice perspective, but maybe I can, create something that's helpful for them, and educational from other perspectives.
Oh, that'll be so amazing and much, much needed. So thank you so much for all the work that you do and for coming on and having this conversation.
Thank you.
I hope you loved this episode of A Healthy Push. If you have, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. This helps people to find the show and get the support they need. And if you know someone who could use a little push, be sure to share this episode with them. And for even more support, head over to ahealthypush.com for show notes and loads of tips, tools, and inspiration to help you on your recovery journey. I'll see you next week.